A reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 4. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in the truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he."
You ever had one of those experiences in your life where you just were in need of something? And in that moment, you unexpectedly crossed paths with someone, and in that moment, they came through. And whatever it was that you needed, they met the need. And at the moment, it felt like just one of these incredible coincidences. Someone that just happened to be there, right time, right place. They were able to help you in just the right way. And when you look back on that and you think about that experience in your life, when you look back at it, you think about that person and how generous they were and how available they were to you. How does that make you feel? What happens on the inside of you? By the way, my name's Jason, one of the pastors here, and I've had several of those experiences in my life. I want to tell you about just one of them. Just over 20 years ago, my wife and I suffered the greatest loss, the greatest tragedy of our entire lives at this point. And if you've been a part of our church for any length of time, no doubt you've heard me talk about this and the way God used it to change my life, because it's just become part of my life story. Just 21 years ago, we lost our firstborn son. His name was Bryce. He was about a week away from his due date. So we were right at the end of our pregnancy, my wife and I. She carried him the whole 9 months. All the baby showers, all had been thrown. Nursery was perfect. It was just ready for him to come home. Car seat, I'd practiced. I was a pro. I had it waiting for him. The only thing left was just bring him home and then figure this whole parenting thing out, right? What am I going to do, and how am I going to parent this kid? And it just all happened so fast, right? One moment, everything's good and it's fine. And then the next moment, My wife and I are in the hospital, and she's delivering our son, and he's never going to take his first breath. And as you can imagine, our friends and our family, our church, they were amazing, you know. They were there for us in so many different ways. But I have a moment. And it's so weird that this moment sticks out because it in the end, it wasn't that significant, to be quite honest. But it just sticks out. 21 years later, I remember it. You know, when you're in a situation like that, as I'm sure you've been in seasons of grief, people want to help, right? And they ask all the time, what can we do to help you? What can we do to help you? And if you've also been in that situation in life, you don't know the answer to that question. You don't even know what you need in those moments. And so a lot of times you just don't know what to say. But I had one of those moments where it was actually my uncle. He was at the hospital with us, and we were going through the whole ordeal. And he said, can we do anything? Is there anything at your house that needs doing? Can I go back and get something for you? And for some reason, right at that moment, it hit me. And then all the chaos and all the stuff that had been going on in my life that week, that I had forgotten to mow the grass. And so I said, well, you know, the grass is probably high. It probably needs mowing. And he said, don't worry, I got it. And so he leaves the hospital, and I didn't see him for another day. He comes back, and he said, hey, by the way, rode by your house the other day. Your grass looks perfect. And I was like, that's odd. I know it hadn't been mowed in over a week. I don't know why it would look good. He said, no. He said, I'm telling you. He said, somebody was by your house, and they mowed your grass yesterday because it looked like it had just been done. And I just thought that was odd. So it took me a long time to figure it out, but later I discovered, because this person never told me, that there was a member of our church. He owned his own landscaping business, and when he heard what had happened to my wife and I, he didn't even ask. He didn't ask if it needed doing. He didn't ask me permission. He just rode to my house, and he noticed the grass was high, and so he got his equipment out, and he spent about half a day just taking care of my yard. He saw that I had a need. He had the means. He had the time. He had the ability. And so he just met my need. And that moment, that memory of what he did for me has been blessing me for over 20 years. And it's grass, y'all. It's just grass, right? It didn't even really matter, really, in the grand scheme of things. But I'll tell you this, it mattered to us. It mattered in that moment. Because it was something that I needed, and someone was there, and they took care of it for me. There was moments like that in your life, right? They don't have to be that big. They don't have to be that significant to make a significant impact on you, because you've probably had moments like that, right? I want you to think of moments like that in your life, kind of like intersections in a road. You know, these places you get to in a road where two paths cross. I want you to think about these paths that you walk down in your life, and you cross paths with people all the time. And when you cross paths with this person, you might not have known it at the time, but there was something you were missing. There was something that you desperately needed. Something that you needed somebody to just come through for you in that moment. And for whatever reason, your life intersected with that certain someone. And in that moment, they had some time, or they had some talent, or had a little bit of means, or they just had some generosity, and they met your need. And at that moment, you would have looked at it and you would have said, well, wow, what a coincidence. What a happy accident, we sometimes say, that our paths just happened to intersect at that moment. But now, looking back on it with a little bit of hindsight and a little bit of context, you look at that intersection with that person and that time and that place, and you would say, that changed everything, or that made a significant, permanent impact on my life. And even today, you would look back on it, you wouldn't call it a coincidence or a happy accident. You would say, well, that was where God was at work. Thank God for the intersection of my life and that person. Maybe it was a friend, and they just called you at the right time with the right words, and you just needed to hear their words. Or maybe they just decided to sit down and write you a card or a letter or just send a text at just the right time. Maybe for you it was a family member, and they stepped in and they saved you from making a really big mess of your life. You were about to make a really dumb decision, and they said, well, maybe you ought to think about that. And they intersected with your life, and you changed your mind, and you look back on it and you say, thank God for that, right? Or maybe it was a doctor. You've been searching for the right diagnosis for a long, long time, and you finally met the one, right? And he or she had the answer, and they had the right treatment plan. Or maybe your life intersected with a partner, and you didn't think you could be loved like that. You didn't even think love like that was possible. But your lives intersected, and there it was. Or maybe you met a counselor who led you through a stage of recovery in your life, or a hard time, or a dark hole of depression. If you're a follower of Jesus, I can tell you this, you've had an intersection in your life. The great shepherd who left 99 sheep came and found you. And your life intersected with him. You were the lost one we've been talking about in the series. And the shepherd brought you home. And he saved you from a life separated from your heavenly Father. We see these significant intersections all throughout the life of Jesus. If you read the life of Jesus, you see he was intersecting people all the time. And this one in particular that we're looking at today, as we just read, you see it in the Gospel of John, chapter 4. Jesus, a group of his followers, they're heading back home. They've spent some time in Jerusalem, but they're heading back to sort of their home base, where they're all kind of based out of they're from. And John, who is the one telling us this story, says, as they're on their way back home, it says, Jesus had to go through the region of Samaria. Now that's an interesting choice of words that John gives us there. Jesus had to go through Samaria. And what makes it interesting is because most Jewish people, like Jesus, like all of this group of his followers together, they wouldn't go through Samaria. In fact, they would intentionally avoid Samaria. They would go out of their way to not have to walk through Samaria. They would take a different route because, well, Samaritans and Jews, they couldn't stand each other. Let's just be honest. They didn't want to have anything to do with each other. I mean, there's all kind of divides between these two people. Racial, ethnic, religious division between them. And the Jews even went so far, they believed that if you closely associated yourself with a Samaritan, if you ate a meal with them, if you even entered underneath the doorframe of their house, you would instantly become unclean. And it meant you would have to go through some formal religious ceremonies just so that you and God could be okay with each other again. I mean, that's how serious they took the association with these people. So when John tells the story and he says, well, you know, Jesus, he had to go through Samaria, I imagine it's most likely that he means Jesus insisted that we do this. Like, Jesus had to go through Samaria. So because Jesus, see, is setting himself up. He's setting himself up to have an intersection. An intersectional moment. And it happens during a rest stop on the journey.
Jesus sits down by a well in the shade to catch his breath, and the group of followers with him decide to go into town to buy food. While Jesus is waiting alone, a Samaritan woman comes to the well alone to draw water. Now, it's the middle of the day when the sun is at its hottest. Nobody comes to draw their daily supply of water at this time. The time to draw water is in the morning, when the day is just getting started and it's cooler and more comfortable. In their culture, drawing water is usually a morning routine that all of the women in town would do together. It was a social gathering where friends and neighbors would work together and connect. But not for this woman. She comes all alone in the heat of the day. And we find out why as Jesus strikes up a conversation with her. Jesus asks her for a drink of water, and she finds his request odd. She says, "You're a Jewish man. You're not supposed to be socializing with me, let alone drink from my water jar. Won't that make you unclean?" This woman must assume that Jesus sees her as inferior because of her race. She's used to being discriminated against and looked down upon. But Jesus reaches out across the ethnic divide and associates himself with her. The conversation quickly turns to religion. Jews believed that the only way to worship God was to come to the temple in Jerusalem and follow the temple rituals and traditions. Samaritans held on to old practices of worship that were frowned upon by the Jewish people. So again, we see a woman who's been told her whole life that she's gotten her relationship with God wrong and that she's not accepted. But once again, Jesus breaks down her perception of herself. He tells her that God's not concerned about where you worship or what tradition you follow. God looks at the heart. He calls people from every nation to worship him in spirit and in truth, no matter who or where they are. And then the woman finally reveals probably the main reason she's there at the well alone in the middle of the day. Why she lives like an outcast in her community. Jesus tells her to go and get her husband. A look of shame and embarrassment comes across her face as she admits to Jesus that she has no husband. She starts to think about the secrets that she carries with her. But once again, to her surprise, Jesus breaks through that wall too. Jesus reveals that he knows about her past. In fact, he knows everything about her. She's had 5 previous husbands, and the man she's living with now won't marry her. Now, some may have heard this story and assumed that the Samaritan woman feels shame because she's had a promiscuous past. But knowing the first century culture she is in, that's most likely not the case. In that day, women could not have bounced around from marriage to marriage willingly or promiscuously because men held almost all of the power. Women couldn't legally divorce their husband, but a man could send his wife away and file divorce papers for any reason at all. In reality, a woman in her situation would have most likely been rejected because of her age or her inability to bear children. So the Samaritan woman is not looked down on because she's some sort of first century bad girl. She's probably a victim who's been thrown aside and abused by 5 previous men with another boyfriend who's about to do the same. And Jesus says to her, I know who you are. I know what you've been through, and I'm here to let you know that God has not abandoned you. He sees you, he loves you, and he accepts you just as you are. Jesus intersects this woman's life with the right words said in the right way at just the right time. In fact, one of the best parts of this story is that this is the first and most direct time that Jesus reveals his identity as God's chosen one, the Messiah. And he chooses to do this for a religious, ethnic, and social outcast. And when you hear the rest of the story, this intersection changes the Samaritan woman's entire life. Soon, her story about her encounter with the Messiah would impact her entire village. And 2,000 years later, on the other side of the world, it's impacting you and me.
Love that story. So, what's the point here? Why are we spending so much time today talking about significant intersections? Well, I want us to remember back last week, if you were here, Nathan taught us about the image that Jesus uses to describe his work within this world and how he talks to us, his followers, and how we fit into that plan. Remember, the image is he's like a farmer. And he goes out into this world and he just spreads seed everywhere he goes. Now, the seed is the good news. The good news that through Jesus, life with God now and for all of eternity is available to every person, no matter who you are. Whoever wants it can have it. That rich and satisfying life that we talk about so often around here, right? Like Jesus described to that woman at the well. In fact, he uses another image. He says, this life that I offer, he said, it's like living water. It's like water that overflows out of your jar and it never runs out. And once you drink from it, you will never thirst again. So God, he's that farmer. He just goes around, he spreads that seed, that good news. That he's the one, and he's also the one that makes it grow. And you and I, well, where do we fit into the story? Jesus says we're the harvesters. We're invited to join God in his work as he redeems the whole creation. And what I want you to see and I want you to understand this morning is that these intersectional moments, this is how we join God in his work. As we go through our day, our lives, we are constantly intersecting the lives of other people. And God's equipped us. He's filled us with his Spirit for one reason, to meet needs. To meet the needs of the people that our lives intersect. To speak words of life and comfort when we find people who are struggling. To provide water to people who are thirsty. To provide food for the hungry. To give direction to people who are confused. To lift up people who are falling down. To just be the right person at the right time with the right thing to say or the right thing to do. Just, that's it. That's the calling. That's what you and I have been given. To just look around you and see the needs. And when you can, meet the need. And every time I talk about this, it seems that I hear the exact same thing. I hear the excuse. And it's the same excuse every single time. There's a reason why we feel like we can't do this. There's a reason why we hesitate. We say, I can't reach my neighbor. I can't reach my family or the people that I work with. And the reason is, well, I just don't know enough. I need to learn some more things. I need to get some more things straight. I can't answer all of their questions. Listen to me just 1 second. I know some of you are on your phones. Some of you are asleep. Can you just hear this part right here? All right? Just for the next 30 seconds. Church, do you know Jesus? Do you know what he has done for you? Do you know that Jesus has made a difference in your life? Do you know that? Do you know that you have been adopted into the family of God for eternity? You know enough. See, it's not about who you know. It's not about what you know. It's not about what you know. It's about who's in you. It's not about knowing enough. It's about knowing him. And he is enough. Because if you know Jesus, you can quench any thirst. If you know Jesus and Jesus is within you, you can meet the needs of the people around you. You can feed the emptiness of the hungry. All you have to do is look around you and look for the intersections. And when you come to the intersection, they are there. Jesus said it this way. He said, look out at the fields. That was his image. He said, look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. And what he was saying is, it's there for the picking. You don't have to spread seed. You don't have to make it grow. You just have to go pluck the harvest out. Just go pull everything that's ripe. Just go out there and bring it in. Jesus did the work. Let your life intersect the needs of people. Let Jesus' life fill the needs all around you, whatever they might be. So I want to help us do this because you can do this. We can all do this. And I want to give you a practical tool. We've been using this tool around our church for several years now. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching your world. It's a way of listening, really, as you go about your day and as you look for the intersections in your world. And if you listen this way and you think this way, you'll be better equipped to recognize when you have a need in front of you that Jesus can meet through you. And if you listen for these cues, and you're going to hear them, you're going to actually hate me this week. Because when I reveal this stuff to you, you're going to be like, oh, that's what he said on Sunday. You're going to hear it all the time. And it's going to be your cue. It's going to be a reminder to you. Oh, I'm in an intersection. I'm in an intersection right now. This person has a need, and Jesus is in me, and Jesus can meet that need. And it's really an invitation in that moment that Jesus invites you to join him in bringing in harvest, in meeting the needs of people. So I'm going to give you 3 simple relational cues that I want you to listen for. And if you're listening, you're going to hear them because they're all around you. If you've been around our church, you know we call these the 3 knots. Here's what we mean by these things. There are so many times when you find yourselves in a conversation with someone, especially if you're first getting to know somebody, and you're going to hear them express one of the 3 knots. These are indicators that there is a person in front of me right now who has a need, and it's a need Jesus can fill. So I'm going to teach you how to hear them, and then I'm going to teach you what to say when you hear them. Here's the first one. The first knot is this: I am not connected. I'm not connected. I don't have the time to go into all the data on this, but I'll just tell you, sociologists are studying this these days in our world, and they are finding that since the pandemic, the amount of friends people report having in their lives, someone they know, someone they trust, someone they can turn to, is at its lowest point since they started tracking it. It has never been worse. So what that means is that people in our world, all around us, are just lonely. They need people. You hear this all the time. The suicide rate, mental health problems are going up. They're at an all-time high. Addiction to opioids and prescription drugs are at epidemic levels in our county. And listen, church, the opposite of addiction, we think it's sobriety. It is not. The opposite of addiction is connection with people. People don't need more treatment centers. People don't need more programs. They need more people in their lives who will walk with them. People who will love them and support them and carry them when they cannot walk on their own. That's what they need. And it's not just folks who are addicted. It's not just folks who are struggling who wind up lonely and wind up disconnected in our world. It's all of us. It's everybody. I'll give you an example. A few weeks back, my wife joined a group on Facebook. All right? I understand this group is very, very popular. Maybe some of you have heard of this Facebook group. It's called Noonan Chatty Women. I take it you've heard of this thing. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a part of this Facebook group because, as you can obviously tell, I'm not very chatty. But it's a group for women. That's why that was a joke. That's why it was funny. Y'all are slow. Anyway, it's a group for women in our community, and they just chat. They talk about things, right? They share news. They talk about stuff they're looking for in the community. They get advice from each other. It's a whole thing. It's a community. Apparently, it's great. But here's my point. The other day, my wife was just looking at it, and she just made a comment. And she said, you know, ever since I got on this group, I'm noticing a trend, and I just think this is fascinating. And I said, what do you mean? She said, people keep jumping onto this group, and they're not looking for restaurant, recommendations. They're not looking for, advice on how to fix things. They're just wanting some friends. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, no, they're people, they're in this group. They've lived in our community for years, she said. And they jump on here and they'll say, I have nobody to hang out with this weekend. Is there somebody out there that would like to hang out? And then they'll start listing things that they're into or things that they like or just their personality. And they're just like, is there anybody out there who's like me? And would you like to just hang out? Anybody. And it hit me as she was talking about that. When your life intersects with a person who is lonely and disconnected from friendships, people who are just looking for people, and we can fill that need. That's our cue, right? Because look at you. I mean, you could be doing a lot of things on a Sunday morning. But here you are. And I know why most of you are here. Because you found your people. Right? You were adopted into the family of God. And this is your family. That's why you show up here every week. And what I'm saying is if there was room for you, there's room for them too. There's room for all of us. So whenever you hear somebody express that sentiment, I'm just not connected, I'm lonely, I need friends, just say something like this. Say, you know what, I know exactly what that feels like. I've been in that same place as you are. But you know what, I found my people. And oddly enough, I found them at church, believe it or not. And they welcomed me in, they loved me, and they have become my family. I'll bet they do the same thing for you. So that's the first one. Second one is this. I'm not prepared. Now, I want you to think back to all the times in your life when you had to go through some sort of life transition. We've all been through transitions, right? When you started that new job, when you moved to that new place, when you got married, when you had kids, when you retired, when you lost your job. At every one of those transitional moments in your life, I know one thing was true for you, because it's been true for me. You felt totally unprepared for what you were going through. You just didn't know what to do, right? You had questions you couldn't answer. You had stress you couldn't manage. You had anxiety about it. You just needed some help. You needed guidance. You needed some support. You just needed a little wisdom to get through it. And what I'm telling you is there are people all around you right now, they feel exactly like that. They feel lost, unprepared, unsure of what their future holds. But think, what if they had a community? What if they had a family like this one? What if Jesus was at the center of that family and they walked through their transition with Jesus and his people? So, when you're talking to somebody and you hear someone say something about a transitional period of their life that they're just not prepared for, That's your cue. You are intersecting with their life in that moment. And all you need to do is just provide what it is that they need. Say something like this: I know what it's like to go through seasons where you feel shaky and unprepared. Here's what I went through. But for me, my church family held me up. They supported me. They walked me through that transition. I found wisdom. I found answers that I needed to get through that season of my life. So why don't you just come sit next to me next Sunday and we'll figure out the answers together. The third and final knot is this: life's not going well. Church, can you remember a time when your life wasn't going well? Can you remember that day when the bottom dropped out? That time when you got that call that you dreaded hearing? When the diagnosis came, when you felt left out? When he left you, when she left you? When your money ran out? When the depression hit you so hard you never thought you'd climb out of that hole? When you wanted to just give in and be done with it? Remember that day? Remember that time? But do you also remember how the body of Christ, your brothers and sisters, pulled you out? They walked you through? Come on, think about it. Where would you be today if it had not been for Jesus working through his church? People all over this community, their lives are not going the way that they planned either. They need what you have. They need Jesus. They need his family. So when you intersect a person and they tell you their story and you realize life is not going well for you, is it? That's your cue. And all you have to say is, I've seen people go through something very similar. In fact, I think I've seen people go through even worse than what you're going through. But I know this. I've also seen people come out the other side stronger and better because they got love and support in my church family. So why don't you just come with me next week? I'll introduce you to some people that helped me. I'm sure they'd be able to help you too. So those are the signals. That's when you know you're at an intersection. So this week, you're going to hear one. And like I said, you're going to hate me when you do. You're going to be like, he told me, right? You're going to hear, I'm not connected. You're going to hear, I'm not prepared. You're going to hear, life's not going well. And when you hear it, I don't want you to hear that. Here's what I want you to hear. I want you to hear your Heavenly Father saying, I'm right here. And you and I are together. And we're at an intersection. And we're gonna work together. I've placed you here for a purpose. Come and join me in my work. And I'm telling you, if you do it, you will not regret it. Now I want to say one last thing. Some of you came here today and you're listening to me and you're just like, man, you're talking past me because I came here for that one of those three reasons. I mean, today, right now, in this moment, where you're sitting, you're at an intersection. But I'm wondering also that maybe if you're starting to think that maybe what you need or what you're looking for might be found in a Jesus community like this one. You're at an intersection with him and his people. And I'm here to tell you, if you just let us know, that living water could be available to you too. So would you talk to somebody before you leave here today? All you got to do is say, I'm at an intersection. We'll take it from there. Stop by the Next Step Center. Or at the very least, if you want to talk to somebody, just put your name on that list for the Next Steps class. And then just show up. And we'll walk you through that intersection, wherever it might lead. But I want to give us time. We need some space today to consider who in our lives might be in an intersection. And God is going to be leading us to meet them in that place. We need time to prepare for it. So to do that, Steve's going to come. He's going to lead us in a time of reflection.